Man, that tree is huge. You must have done a lot of squats. Deadlifts? Romanian deadlifts? Bent over rows? Shoulder presses? What'd you do to get that big? Huh? What'd you do?
Train the muscles, not the joints.
Mountain. Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding. Am I in the shot? Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding. And today we're going to talk about the most anabolic exercise you can do in order to stimulate growth as a natural bodybuilder. Now, I talk about this all the time. I talk about how natural bodybuilders have to systemically stimulate themselves so that way their endocrine system gets going at the same time as they stimulate the individual muscles through isolation movements, different rep ranges, and so forth. So, one thing I'm going to talk about are a few things you can do to stimulate the entire system, and certain exercises seem to do this, and I'm going to talk about the reasons why I think this may be true. Now, first things first, a lot of times people think, oh yeah, do full body movements. They're the best movements possible to stimulate the overall system, and to a point I agree with this, but there's going to be some stipulations on this. Sometimes when you're doing full body movements, you're actually doing extremely lightweight, and sometimes that lightweight is only because you're overstressing one small area and understressing a whole bunch of other areas. So case in point, say a power clean from the floor. You might be lifting and maybe a deadlift is not necessarily the most efficient movement for you. Maybe you have to strain your lower back exponentially more just to get a certain amount of weight to the mid-range, and then the muscles that are responsible for mid-range and above are not even challenged at all. This might not necessarily lead to better growth, and worst case scenario could lead to an injury because you're overstraining the ligaments in the lower back, right? So if something is already the weak link and you make it even the weaker link, well, that sometimes is going to be an inefficient way to stimulate the overall system. So that's one thing to consider, is overstimulating one small area, even if you're doing a full body movement, might not necessarily, or in a lot of cases won't necessarily stimulate the whole system because you're not using the ligaments and the structure efficiently to stimulate and challenge the most amount of muscles possible, okay? So this is something that's totally misunderstood by the beginners on the internet, and there's a lot of stupid people on YouTube talking like, oh, full range, otherwise, you know, it's useless. It's just absolute crap. They don't know what they're talking about. Anybody that tells you full range or nothing knows nothing about muscular growth. I'm putting it out there and it's the truth, okay? So I'm living proof of it, right? So people always come along and say, Jason, you should do full range of motion, this and that. I'm like, well, that didn't work for me. And then I did this movement and it did work for me. And I produced results where I won at the national level over and over again. Who's right? The guy that produced the results or the person who has an idea? Welcome to the internet. The trolls out there, the people that haven't produced results and are insecure about it, they go into their little minds and say, oh, if I think it, then it must be true, instead of producing the results. Why do people listen to these people? I don't get it. Anyway.
It's flat.
It is flat. Because I'm too strong. It was fully pumped before I started. Then it got flat right away. You see that? That's how strength works. See? Learn your lesson, man. The thing is, even if I took a rock, I still flatten that too. Like an actual rock. So another stipulation on this, using the whole body movements or the full body movements or as many muscles as possible, is you want to avoid injury. If something is going to injure you, that's obviously not going to make your body anabolic because you're going to be spending time in stirrups or in a cast or in surgery or basically, you know, legs up in a bed somewhere or whatever because you just strained something. So that's the other thing you want to make sure that you're not doing. Just because something might seem right in theory, if it's injuring you, it is not the right technique and it's not going to increase the amount of anabolic activity in your body. So a lot of times people think stressing tendons and ligaments and causing trauma is actually the way to stimulate the body. Causing trauma muscularly is different than causing trauma in the joints. There is a difference. So overstretching or overlifting, like lifting way too heavy and not being able to maintain proper form, is also going to cause a lot of problems. So remember this before you apply anything else that I'm saying, okay? So the movements that I found to be the most effective to stimulate the overall system, you would think would be really heavy bent over rows or possibly Romanian deadlifts or deadlifts. But what I found is the one movement that was more effective than all of them, and I found this out by mistake because I just moved the way I do, is squats. Squats were the most effective movement for myself. Now, this might be different for you. Some of you guys get different issues and stuff like that. So you got to work around those things. But I found that squats, especially partial or 90-degree squats for my own body type, because remember, I bend over a lot when I squat, so that means 90-degree squats, I still activate the hamstrings a lot. Now, if you're a person that stands straight up and down and you squat, a 90-degree squat will be hard on your knees, so you may have to come down deeper, right? So there's not this one-size-fits-all crap that goes on the internet here. Remember, I'm talking about the right range of motion for your body to stimulate. So the disclaimer on this is that squats were the best way for me to stimulate my overall system, and therefore when I went into doing my other lifts and my other exercises, I found like my body was more anabolic and I put on more muscle size because of this. Because the way I squatted, I felt the stress in the muscle bellies. The muscles were hitting failure, not the joints. The joints weren't taking stress. They weren't getting the crap beat out of them all the time. So I found that by squatting the way I did, I kept the stress on the most amount of muscle bellies possible. So that's going to be your answer, is the exercise where you get the most amount of muscle bellies involved in the exercise, and not just like, say somebody that squats ass to the grass and say it's not right for them. I'm not saying if it is right for them, it's different, but if it's not right for them, sometimes they'll just feel nothing but just this muscle, the medialis on the knee, right? You know that muscle right close to the knee? They'll feel that strain like crazy, but the lateralis is not activated, the glutes aren't activated, maybe a little bit of the hamstring, but then the lower back is possibly not necessarily challenged the same as doing a heavier mid-range type squat. So you want to find that perfect area where you can maintain tension on the muscles.
Hey man, I really like your physique. Can I take a few photos of you?
Wow! So the other thing you want to consider is also, is there a constant tension variable in here? Is there a constant tension aspect to this movement? Because I found constant tension with the most amount of stress on the most amount of muscles in the muscle bellies, and constant tension I find created the most anabolic response in my body. So constant tension squats where I just go up and down, I never locked out of the top, never rested at the bottom. I kept that tension on the muscles. I was feeling the tension in the muscle bellies and using heavy weight. And this triple threat combo I found to be the most anabolic exercise for myself. Now you may find a different exercise that may be like this for you. Maybe it's the Romanian deadlift. Maybe it's a partial deadlift from the floor where you're keeping tension on that lower back and on the hamstrings. You may find that that's the most anabolic thing for you. Or maybe it's like a partial deadlift, like a rack deadlift. But the problem is with rack deadlifts, I find, is that you are resting at the bottom. So maybe you might not find the exact same result as far as the anabolic activity in the body from that, because you are resting at the bottom before you make that big lift, right? So I found that constant tension was an important part of it. At the same time, tension on the muscle bellies, and at the same time, heavy weight on the overall system. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that I do believe that involving the lower back and the legs together is a very important part of this, because the legs are a huge amount of muscle tissue in the body, and by activating them, you're also pumping a lot of blood through and causing an overall systemic response as well. So I do think the most anabolic movement is going to include the legs and the lower back if you wish to stimulate the overall system and get overall muscle growth as a natural bodybuilder. So I hope this helps you out in your natural bodybuilding journey. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com. There I have music albums for purchase and workout programs. And thanks a lot to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. Mountain. Mountain.